Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the teams I'm going to be watching very closely as we head into spring camp. Definitely some very interesting teams. Texas probably leads that charge with Arch Manning, so definitely going to be interesting to watch them along with a lot of other teams around the country. But let's get into my 2024 postseason All-American team because there's a lot of guys on here, and there's definitely some guys that made their way on here during the CFP, some guys that didn't necessarily make their way on there but got very, very close to possibly getting on here. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and I will give some groups as we go through this. The best running back group, what best wide receiver group, kind of around that nature as we go through this thing. But definitely wanted to highlight some players because probably the last time that we'll really get into the 2024 season. We'll probably leave it behind as we head into next week, and definitely wanted to give some love to some big time players before we did that. But the quarterback is Cam Ward. I don't know if that needs to be said. He was the best quarterback in the country. Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, they were close. At the end of the day, this was the best quarterback. Now, Will Howard went on a run that was very close to what Cam Ward was able to do throughout this year, but overall, that was the best offense in the country. That was the guy that was the most dangerous, and it wasn't necessarily because the elite athleticism or anything crazy. It was because he was way too calm in that pocket. He was a guy that would stand flat-footed and then throw a ball 40 yards downfield. Very talented guy. He moves forward to the NFL draft, and I'll give out my top 10 picks for the quarterbacks a little later in the next week. Probably do maybe a whole day where I just go kind of through the draft and give you guys some early thoughts on that. But overall, this is probably my number one quarterback. This is a guy that I think could be the number one pick overall, and definitely an incredible, incredible player to watch at Miami. One that I think Miami is going to regret leaving without getting him to the CFP. But at the end of the day, very talented quarterback, and obviously had the best year from quarterbacks as far as I'm concerned. The duo of running backs here, Ashton Jeanty and Cam Skattebo, about as easy as you can possibly do it, if I'm being totally honest. Ashton Jeanty ended second in the Heisman, almost broke Barry Sanders' record that stood for decades, and then Cam Skattebo probably should have been in New York City, if I'm being totally honest. Not a huge gap between him and number 4, but at the end of the day, Skattebo did give us the best CFP performance of the year. Ashton Jeanty gave a number of best individual performances throughout this year. So, remarkable group here, no doubt about that. I think you have running backs. I think you got to go with the group of Ohio State. If you're going to go with a room overall, I think you got to go with Ohio State with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. But these two guys were really setting the pace for this year, and it was remarkable to watch these two guys kind of burst onto the scene. For wide receivers, I went a little bit different in this one than I thought I would have, at least coming out of the regular season than I definitely would have, and I added Jeremiah Smith into this group. But Nick Nash was absolutely incredible. Was a leading receiver in the FBS this year. Was a guy that I think is going to be special at the next level. He has such a good body control, such an ability to catch passes that are just anywhere near him. Very talented kid. Cannot wait to see what he can do at the next level. And then you do have Travis Hunter playing some great, great football. Obviously, a guy that did some great things. I don't necessarily think he should have been, Blitnikov level, but very, very talented player nonetheless, and obviously a guy that we expect to possibly go number 1 overall as well. And then Jeremiah Smith, the guy that would go number 1 overall in this draft if he was eligible. Incredibly, incredibly talented kid. Made the play of the CFP in a lot of different ways with that catch at the very end, and definitely a guy that's going to be awesome to watch throughout this year. I think you got to go with the group of Ohio State. If you're going to go with just a room of wide receivers, very hard to beat what Ohio State has. Now, I think Texas, I think Oregon get a little bit close, but what Ohio State has in that room is just different in every sense of the word. But those are my wide receivers. Love this trio that we had, and I move forward to tight ends. I'm going to go with Harold Fannin. I think this is the best tight end in the country this year. I don't think it was a very big gap between him and Tyler Warren, obviously. Two very elite guys, and cannot wait to see what happens in the NFL draft process for this kid. He's a very fun player, not necessarily the most elite blocker in the world, so definitely something that he's going to have to figure out as he heads to the next level, but he was incredible all the way throughout the year. Was one of the most elite pass catchers in the country, was second in receiving yards right behind Nick Nash, so very, very talented player. This was the guy that I was drawn to the most throughout this year. Now, Tyler Warren is no slouch. I'm not necessarily saying there's a huge gap between these two. I think it's about as close as any position that I had to do, but at the end of the day, I leaned a little bit more towards Harold Fannin. Was incredible this year, and really, I think he's going to be an awesome NFL player. And then for the offensive line, I went for a group. I didn't necessarily go for individual positions. There were definitely some guys I could call out, like Will Campbell, like Kelvin Banks, like all those big-time guys. But at the end of it, Seth McLaughlin over at Ohio State, another one. But Oregon is the team that I'm going to kind of peg here as the best offensive line in the country. I think there's a lot of different guys that played some really great football. The tackles in Ajani Cornelius and Josh Connerly are about as elite as you're going to find across the country. And you have Matthew Bedford in the middle that if they had him in, they were going to run the ball very effectively. Very good group, and definitely a group that just continuously got better throughout the year. About 3 or 4 of those guys are going to get drafted this time in April. And then you got the defensive tackles, Mason Graham and Walter Nolan, two guys that really set themselves apart throughout this year. I thought about putting one of those Ohio State guys in here, but at the end of the day, this duo is absolutely incredible. And I think you look at Mason Graham, he's kind of a true, can't miss guy. I think he's a guy that he's one of those that he's not going to bust. He's not going to be a guy that misses in the NFL. He's going to be a guy that really succeeds because he's just elite in every sense of the word. Can be one of the best run-stuffing defensive tackles you've seen, but also can get after the quarterback in a way that a guy that size should just not be able to do. So, remarkable stuff from him. And then Walter Nolan, as athletic as can be, and the ceiling is still very much above him. One of those guys that I think could really burst on the scene in the right situation in the NFL. So, really love this duo. I think when you're talking about a group, it's really hard to beat what Michigan has with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. I think Texas did a great job with their group after two guys went off to the NFL, and they'll have to do it again, as will Michigan. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. But these two these two defensive tackles were downright elite in every sense of the word, and these guys are going to be monsters at the next level. The edge rushing was a little bit tougher, but I think you got to go with Kyle Kennard. I think you got to go with Abdul Carter. Now, there were definitely some players in the back half of the season, Jack Sawyer in that CFP race, that made me think about slotting him in here, maybe JTT in here. But at the end of the day, Kyle Kennard put on a show this year. He was absolutely incredible all the way throughout the year. Was a guy that I think in a lot of ways should have won the Bednarik over Travis Hunter. So very, very talented guy, totally a game wrecker, and cannot wait to see what he does at the next level. A little bit more raw than some of these other guys, but definitely a guy that could really explode onto the scene in the next couple of years. And then Abdul Carter, a true freak of nature, a guy that when you see him on the football field, you don't fully understand how he's doing what he's doing, but at the end of the day, it's going to be awesome to see what he can do throughout this year, and definitely a guy that I think whoever gets him in the NFL draft, if he goes number one overall, I have no problem with that. Tennessee Titans, congratulations, you got an absolute freak. So I do think this is a guy that's really going to make a lot of people turn their heads during the draft, and he's one of those guys that sounds like he wants to go to the Eagles. He's not going to be remotely on the board by the time the Eagles are ready to pick. So going to be an interesting player to watch. Definitely a guy that I really like, and one of those guys that I think you can fit in for a gold jacket right about now and just have to hold on to it for a couple of years. The linebacking group was very tough to put together as well, because I think there were a lot of linebackers around that kind of even 10 group that were very, very tough to rank, but I do have Anthony Hill, Jalen Walker, and Danny Stutzman as my group out here. Would be a nasty group. There's no doubt about that. Anthony Hill all over the place on the defensive side of the ball, can rush the passer kind of like Jalen Walker, who that's really his kind of attribute. That's the thing that he does the best, but he can fly around the field. He can cover people when you very much need him to, and then Danny Stutzman is one of the most consistent products you have ever seen in college football in the last 10 years, if I'm being totally honest. He is as good of a run defender as you're going to find in college football history. He is so good at filling gaps, at making sure he's in the right place, but overall, this group is absolutely incredible. When you're looking at the group that I would go with from the linebackers, I think you got to go with Notre Dame. You're led by Jack Kaiser, you have Jaden Osbury, you have a number of other guys in that group, you have Drake Bowen, who made a great play in the national title, some really talented players in that group. No individuals outdid this group, but overall, if you're taking a group of linebackers, I think you got to go up there to South Bend, Indiana. Cornerbacks, very tough group to put together, but I think Noel Williams is one of the more underrated guys throughout this year. Had 7 INTs this year and gave Cal some big-time chances throughout the year that they probably wouldn't have had if he was not on that team. Very talented player, and then you got Jahdae Barron. Won the Thorpe. He definitely should have won the Thorpe. An absolute beast, a freak of nature, and definitely a guy that was as elite in coverage as he was in run help. Definitely going to be a guy that I think goes in the first round in the NFL draft, and it'll be really awesome to watch what unfolds in that one. I think if you're going for a collection of cornerbacks, if you're going for a room, I think you're going to be hard to beat Texas. Now, Notre Dame would be very close, in my opinion, with Leonard Moore, with Christian Gray, with a lot of these guys. But Jahdae Barron, Malik Muhammad, Jalen Gilbo, you have... I'm blanking on the name right now, but a very talented group over there at Texas, and I think we're talking about cornerbacks. Very hard to beat this group right here. I think these two are absolutely incredible throughout this year, and Noel Williams is one of those guys that we'll probably forget as we head into next year, but we definitely shouldn't. He's a very talented guy and definitely could continue that rise as we head into 2025. The safeties are about as easy as can be. If I'm being totally honest with you, they were the two best safeties in the CFP. They were the two best safeties this entire year. Now, Malachi why am I blanking on his name? Malachi Starks, excuse me, from Georgia, played an incredible season. But overall, I think you got to go with these two. These two were absolutely incredible, and we get to see Caleb Downs for at least one more year in college football. Almost definitely one more year in college football, so that's going to be awesome to watch. But easily, I think if you're picking a group, I think you have to go with Ohio State. You add Lathan Ransom to Caleb Downs, and it's about as good as you can possibly imagine. But overall, I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how that all unfolds. And these two are about as elite as you're going to find at that safety position all around the country. So downright elite, and these two guys are the two best guys in the country as far as I'm concerned. And Anthony, you're absolutely right. I think that linebacker group give me a little bit of versatility more than anything else. Danny Stutzman obviously leads the group, no doubt about that, but I do think you have Anthony Hill and Jalen Walker just kind of freaks on the outside that can make all types of plays. But moving on to the coaching staff, because I wanted to give some love here as well. Shannon Dawson did a remarkable job at offensive coordinator this year, led the best offense in the country, and now gets one of the best processors in the sport. And Carson Beck going into next year, going to be really interesting to see what he can do with that group. But what he did with this group this year was just downright special, and Cam Ward was obviously at the center of that. The defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, I would have him as my pick as the Royals Award right now as the best assistant in the country. He was downright incredible, and he had all the talent in the world, no doubt about that, but you would have thought this was the All-American team alone. You would have thought that was the All-American defense all across that thing, the way they were playing late in the season. He was downright elite and did an incredible job throughout this year. And then Marcus Freeman's my head coach. Now, I could go with Ryan Day here, and I think it's very, very close, but the job that he's done throughout this year has been incredibly tough. You lose to a team like NIU, you have USC, you have Louisville, you have all these teams waiting on deck to take you off, to kind of cut the head off the dragon and be the team that ended Notre Dame's chances. And the CFP, no one was able to do it. You need to have a great leader to find your way through 12, 14 games that they had to play after that and find a way to win a lot of those games. It was all this guy. It was the guy that was leading the way in a lot of ways. And then Xavier Watts, Riley Mills, all the guys leading in that locker room. It was a remarkable, remarkable team. You hear guys talk about this group and they say it's one of the most special groups that I've ever been able to cover because of how connected they were. And it started up top with that guy. Remarkable, remarkable head coach, and cannot wait to see what he does the next couple of years, because it could be a very special time for Notre Dame as you move forward, because that guy is downright special. But overall, I think you look at All-American teams and you're going to have some guys that are all over the place. I think that tight end group is very hard to pick from. I think the cornerback group is very hard to pick from. But overall, pretty much like the group that I ended with. That was a remarkable, remarkable season for all of those guys, and it'll be awesome to see. A couple of them move forward to 2025, a couple of them move on to the NFL, but it'll be awesome to see what happens next year, and definitely will be a star-studded group. And let's talk about that a little bit. Let's get into the top 10 quarterbacks as we head into 2025. Who could be the quarterback on that All-American team at the end of the year? Definitely a very interesting group. Some groups that are very experienced and inconsistent. Some groups that are very, very talented but very young. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.